You're listening to Forging Fluidity with Savannah Wishart and Griffin Coombs, where we humbly navigate the idea of primal purpose, exploring conversations around physical, psychological, and spiritual well-being on the quest for a truly conscious and meaningful human experience. I'm Griffin, and my co-host is Savannah. She's a self-love expert and fine art photographer, and she uses life coaching and forest bathing photo sessions to create conscious containers for people to lean into vulnerability and explore their relationship with themselves.
And Griffin is a body awareness and breathing expert who uses targeted physical training and stress resilience coaching to help people become more physically capable and emotionally grounded. In our first episode back after an almost 2-year hiatus, we're together in person once again, this time in my current town of Bellingham, Washington. After several days of local explorations, outdoor adventures, and our usual inspiring conversations, we reflect during this episode on integrity and how to show up as the best version of yourself in all areas of your life. We take the ideas of hard work and wearing different masks for different people, and we relate it to our own lives, including Griffin's first mountain biking experience ever. And of course, the episode concludes with some thought-provoking reflections from me so that you can start integrating your truest self no matter what situation you find yourself in.
Hello, and welcome back. A big welcome back to the Forging Fluidity podcast after almost 2 years off. Savannah and I are here together in person in Bellingham, Washington, ready to talk about some stuff.
Lots of important stuff has happened over the last couple of years. So it's been a little over 2 years since our last recording when I went to Morocco to meet Griffin for the first time. And I was in Portugal at the time and just thought, what the heck? Let's go a little plane hop over and meet for the first time since we started talking in 2017 and kind of vice versa this time.
Yeah, I was going to a dear friend's wedding in California, and I thought, while I'm on the West Coast, all the way from Morocco, might as well pop up to Washington State and do a round 2 of hanging out together, philosophizing, just touching base with our goals, our growth, our development, and also having some fun outdoorsy experiences in the Bellingham area as well, which has been pretty cool.
It's been great. So this will be the only podcast for a little bit, at least, that we'll both be together, but we're relaunching with consistency and intention, and who knows where Griffin will be recording from next.
Who knows? But in any case, I'm happy to be here. I'm happy that we're together. We got to spend the last 5 or so days together. And a thing that we've been talking about since even before I came was how it's hard to talk with certain people about the standards that you hold for yourself as a person, meaning not in your professional life. And it got me thinking about how we're taught from a very young age to work really hard. And some people internalize that and some don't. But we're mostly taught to do that in our professional lives. So it starts with working hard in school, and then it goes into working hard for professional opportunities, and then turns into being a high performer at your job. But I don't necessarily see a parallel to what we're encouraged to do in our personal lives as well. Would you agree?
Yeah, I definitely agree. It can be difficult, and as I've experienced shifting between different communities and different parts of the world and how engaged I am with specific demographics online versus in person, is just I've become more aware of my own background in self-development and fine-tuning mental toughness and bridging the gap between emotional, mental, and physical training, and wanting to grow as a high-performance human across all areas of life. And it's become we've talked a little bit on like private conversations about how we struggle to connect with people when they are just kind of going through the motions of the day-to-day life, and they're like, yeah, I'm making this much money and I have this many hobbies and that's all that I need. And reaching a point of satisfaction to a certain extent, but then there's the question of when does that satisfaction turn into complacency and you start to use different labels as a crutch and an excuse not to grow. So, for example, I'm a stressed person, or I'm a bad communicator, instead of reversing a lens back on yourself to say, oh, like, how could I actually get better at managing my stress? How could I communicate better with my partner so that our relationship is better, less reactive, more responsive? But there is definitely a culture that just encourages that high performance within certain areas of our life, and then we just kind of turn into a couch potato once we get home.
Yeah, so that's not to say that people who aren't motivated in certain areas of self-development aren't hard workers. It's just that the hard work seems to be encouraged to remain inside of a certain container that's mostly professional. So it's like you can be, a lot of people I know are workaholics, and they do amazing work and they do really hard work inside of their jobs. And then it's almost like all of that was poured into that, and there's none left to work on your relationships, to work on your emotional development, or to do anything that requires a similar level of focus or intention that's outside of the workplace. That container also makes it really easy to switch off and become less intentional, because when the workday is its own entity, then you can almost like disconnect it from the rest of your life. So it's like I'm going into work and I'm on autopilot, just working really hard because I've been kind of conditioned. I've conditioned myself to work really hard and get done what I need to get done. But I've also conditioned myself not to connect it to the quality of my overall life. It's almost like a separate thing that just it lives on its own. It's like we've created a monster that is just the way that I unconsciously operate as a professional. And it's completely connected to how we live our personal lives, because as I just mentioned, it drains energy, or it can drain energy if we're not careful, from our personal life. So I'm thinking about, I worked at a school district once that changed the term work-life balance to work-life integration, which...
Ooh, I like that.
Yeah, I don't know what they were getting at, but at least for this purpose, it sounds like a really appropriate term, because you can't compartmentalize your life. You can try to, and in some cases, maybe thinking about it that way is healthy. But at the end of the day, you are the same organism that woke up in your bed and that went to work and that came home from work. You're the same personality that is dealing with work people as you are with your spouse or your kids or whoever else. So it's worth integrating them so that you can become more whole, I guess.
And I just think that the more that I interact with people, because for me, I'm in a very new experience right now where I've been in the same town for about a little less than 2 years now. It's the longest I've lived anywhere as an adult, and not tried to live anywhere else, not had my sights set on the future or a different continent or a different country. And so this is the deepest that I've gotten into more in-person connections locally, and just seeing how different people interact and how they build their lives and what their foundations and comforts are. And I would say that I just see more people in their daily lives, they put on a different hat and they kind of become different people depending on who they're interacting with. And to me, I always come back to my core values, and one of them, well, two paired together, are authenticity and integrity. And when I see people who maybe they're not being a fully honest version of themselves amongst this person, and then they shift over to this other person where they can be open and vulnerable, then to me that creates a little bit of a broken connection. And I kind of wonder to myself, well, who are they really? Like, which version is the person that I'm coming to know and coming to trust? And can I trust them if an external influence of people and community is going to warp who they are and how they're showing up and probably what they're communicating?
Yeah, I think it's important to probably distinguish between vulnerable in the way that you only are and probably should be to people who have reached a certain level of closeness versus being a what seems to be like a totally different person. So I think it's normal if you have some people with whom you can be vulnerable and other people that you can't. That's what people distinguishes people in your circle close to you, people you love and trust, from strangers or acquaintances or just kind of distant friends.
Yeah.
But then, so what are you saying? Are you like, how do you distinguish between what you're saying and that?
That's true. Vulnerability, I guess, is not really the right word to be using with that. So I would think of it maybe as different layers of self. So, of course, as you go about your life, you can be authentic, but only showing level 1 to someone that you don't really know. And then maybe your level 5 is your partner that you're with and you can be fully open with. But there is that same foundation. So I think the easiest example that's just most applicable across the world is like how devoted you are to not drinking. So if you're kind of telling people like, oh, I don't really drink that much, I'm not a drinker, and then maybe with a couple of your closer friends, you uphold that part of your identity and that habit with yourself, but then you get into situations where you're less comfortable. Maybe it helps you with your social anxiety, and then you're suddenly like, I can have a beer or two and this is fine. And then that becomes something that is broken trust with yourself. And like, who really are you? Oh, I don't know. That doesn't seem like a great example.
Well, I think that the difference and this is a theme that's come up for me a lot, and some people that I've been talking to over the past several months, is it depends on your relationship to yourself and how you view that sort of commitment to not drinking. So if you're somebody who, and yeah, we're just using alcohol as an example, this could be anything. But if you are somebody who doesn't want to drink alcohol and you are making a promise to yourself, or you are making a commitment to yourself that you're not a drinker, you're not somebody who chooses to partake in that, and then you cross that boundary with yourself or you betray yourself, then I think that disconnect is totally valid. And I think it's a great example of what you're talking about. There's a difference if you're somebody who hasn't necessarily made a commitment to yourself, but you just notice that you're not necessarily inspired to drink in certain contexts. And then other contexts, you might feel like, hey, I feel like doing this right now. And I think that that's okay, but it's just about keeping promises to yourself, I think. And if you're in an environment or you're with people that sort of encourage you to break promises to yourself, that is where you start to lose integrity. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that it kind of comes back to the question of who are you when no one's watching? And if you don't know the answer to that question, then it's going to be really easy to just like be a different person in this drinking environment, in the gym environment, in your work environment, in your home environment. It's like you can pivot between all of these things that are superficial, but then who do you come back to when you're alone?
That's great.
That can be a difficult question to answer if you are always around people. So if you live with your partner, for example, then it's going to take a lot of intentional alone time to explore that question and to carve out the space to be able to do that.
Yeah, so that could be an example of how that could be an example of the difference between what you're actually valuing and how you're actually acting on your values versus what your partner might bring out in you, and if that's aligned. And so if we brought it back to another example, what we were talking about earlier is like workaholics who then just completely let themselves go after work and either disconnect from their family or their friends, or they're just mean, or they don't take care of themselves, they don't exercise, eat poorly, drink a lot of alcohol, then there's a disconnect between how you're showing up for yourself in the workplace versus how you're showing up for yourself in your personal life. And so that's a great question that you brought up, is who are you when no one's watching? And that is, I know you've posted about how that's kind of the definition of integrity as far as you're concerned. And I think that's a great definition, where if you are really reliable and really hardworking in the workplace, and then you are completely unreliable and dismissive and not present and emotionally unavailable for your friends or family or the other people in your life, which of those is really you? And then the second question is, whichever one is not really you, what's causing you to move in that direction? What's causing you to be that inauthentic version of yourself?
Yep. And I think part of the question too here is, or not part of the question, but part of the definition to look at of what does it mean when no one's watching as well is, I would say the most simple answer would be just alone time spent in silence. And so I just think there's so many different platforms around us constantly swirling around in the digital world that everyone is kind of always watching. Like if you are making videos of yourself or taking pictures for Instagram, that needs to be removed from the equation. Like if you, like, would you go on that run if you couldn't record it on your phone and track the measurement and brag about it to your friends and keep track of it? Like, I'm all for keeping track of measurable progress with your fitness, but would people do it if you couldn't record it, you didn't have a metric to share, and if you couldn't boast about it on Instagram?
What a great question. What a great example of what that question means. So, yeah, it's like it's like what we already said. Who are you when no one's watching? But I didn't even think of that being an example of we almost create an environment, or we fabricate an environment where people are watching in anticipation of them maybe watching it on social media or wherever we're going to post it. But it's like we're behaving differently when someone's not watching, with the idea that we are performing.
Yeah, and it's a weird time to be living in, because we now are all encouraged and conditioned by social standards to be performers, basically. So our life is supposed to look good on a screen. It's not about how good our life feels inside of us, or what we're touching, or what we're seeing, or what we're feeling, but it's about how can this look good to somebody else on a 2D screen in the palm of their hand. So we are sacrificing, often I think we're sacrificing the quality of living over the quality of a picture or a video.
Yeah, that's really well put. And that brought me to thinking about just the events of this past week, particularly yesterday's mountain biking trip. I took my first mountain biking ride ever. And
did great.
Thank you. I definitely had moments of scaredness, and then also moments where I took my own advice with my breathing and stress management and nervous system regulation coaching, and was able to get into a state of a bit more relaxation and having a lot of fun, as much as you can on your first time ever learning a new skill that is very high adrenaline and pretty dangerous just by nature. But it was really fun, and I learned a lot. And part of it is like, okay, this is me, not because we didn't bring a camera. We lamented about how we forgot to bring a GoPro like 100 times, but this wasn't for anybody but our own experience. And so I had to be the me that was honest with me and knew number one, how I was feeling, and number two, what I wanted to do and who I wanted to be. Because candidly, my background and my life experiences would have me default to somebody who's a little bit more scared, a little bit more timid, and a little bit less open to new experiences, especially if they're high risk, if they're uncertain. And going through not just the material that I teach to people for stress management, but also having gone through ups and downs and all directions of running my own coaching business and taking the leap from the certainty of full-time employment is just every experience you have teaches you a bit more about uncertainty, a bit more about how you want to behave during uncertainty, and finding it in you to do what needs to be done based on what you really know when nobody's watching, what needs to be done, and being honest with yourself about that. So it was like neither quitting and saying, I don't want to do this, it's too scary, but also not pretending that, yeah, I'm totally fine, and putting on bravado of just like, yeah, I'm not scared of anything, whatever, I'll do. If I die, I die, no big deal. But actually being an integrated version of myself where both of those pieces of me exist, and I have to find where I can control and manage them and use what I know and practice what I preach to my own advantage. And I ended up having a really good first ride. And not just like, I probably didn't look that great, but I didn't look terrible, I don't think. And it's less about how I looked and more about just, do I feel like I did what I needed to do? Because if I had ended that ride and not gone down the mountain and said I'm too scared, then I would have been disappointed with myself. But had I not honored the way my nervous system was reacting and then met myself where I was at and regulated myself and just pushed through it, I wouldn't have felt great either. I would have felt sort of dissociated from myself in a way. So it's a balancing act. And I think that it comes in every aspect of our life. That's an example of just like a fun hobby where you think it's just, there's nothing to it except like just overcoming fear and just doing a fun, cool thing. But as serious as a relationship or how you behave at work can feel, even the most fun, cool things that are just in the form of hobbies are opportunities for you to check in and ask if you are being your authentic self.
Yeah. I love that. And I mean, you definitely looked pretty good from what I could see from it being in front of you.
Thank you for saying that live on a podcast.
Of course. And to Griffin's credit, it was not good conditions. And for anybody that doesn't know, Bellingham is, I've been told, in the top 5 towns for mountain biking in the U.S. And it's not easy conditions. It's steep, it's rocky, it's rooty. And we went after a lot of rain. So it was sloppy, it was wet, there were puddles, and Griffin did great.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I love what you talked about with the integrative experience and that both of these things can exist. And I think that so often, like between work and relationships and these things that give us stress responses, our usual mode of operation is to just close the door on it and to ignore it. And then in my experience, that leads to more dissociation. And so I disconnect from my internal experience, and looking back at it and doing more of this work, I can see that I just have these pockets of time where my memory isn't that great of certain experiences because I'm in a stress response and I'm just not fully present. So I'm avoiding the feelings, and it gives me a different experience that I don't have a great memory of, which is unfortunate. And I think that a lot of it has to do with having the courage to sit with the uncomfortable feelings. And most people don't want to do that. But I believe, this should be fact checked, but I believe that you just need to sit with an uncomfortable feeling for 7 minutes. And you can set an alarm and you can just be like, okay, I'm going to feel sad. I'm going to feel angry. I'm going to feel it all for 7 minutes. And then usually it can pass through. So this can be great if you are managing something like depression as well, because so often when we're feeling down, we just try to should our way out of it. Like, I should feel happier, I should feel good. And an old coach of mine used to tell me, don't should on yourself. And so it's just a great motto to remove that from your vocabulary and replace it with, okay, I can, I choose to, I don't want to, I choose not to, I need to, and I will. And so just different things like that of bringing more intention into choices. And so part of that integrative experience that you talked about too is just allowing two things to exist. And people love to compartmentalize things because it simplifies everything. And it's like, I can choose the black or I can choose the white, but there's a million shades in between, and that can be overwhelming. But we can allow both to exist, and we can find that middle ground. And there's a lot of beauty in that gray area, and there's a lot of colors as well.
Yeah. I love the advice you gave about tuning in to what you're actually feeling, because we know that interoception, or the ability to be aware of internal sensations, and those are linked to your emotions. The ability to be aware of those is directly related to like the resilience of our nervous system to stress. And so if we can sit with feelings, literal feelings in the body, and if we can attach the emotional state we're in to physical sensations, if we can go that deep and be with it, we are becoming more resilient, even if we don't feel necessarily like we've psychologically resolved, quote unquote, the issue at hand. Mm-hmm. We're already becoming better, we're becoming more authentic, and we're becoming more resilient. When it comes to figuring out where these areas are, what would you say are some questions, some reflection questions that people can ask themselves as we start to wrap this up?
I would say one of the first things to get clear on is what the identities are that you're upholding within all of the areas of your life. So if you're starting from the bare bones of the beginning, I would maybe almost make a pie chart or whatever visual works for you, but just to kind of create those compartments of your life. So do I have a different work life? Do I have a gym life? Am I a parent? Like, what are all the areas of my life that I participate in daily? And then once you have that, then you could make a list of all of the identities that you have. So I'm a mom, I'm a wife, I'm a husband, I'm a sister, I'm an athlete, I'm a
friend, I'm a mountain biker, I'm a whatever you are.
Yep, just all of these different things. And I would say that the identities are often just based on things that you are doing. So there is an attachment to that archetype based on actions. And then once you have that, you can kind of sit with that list and then just ask yourself some internal questions about who you are when you're not doing. And that can come down to figuring out your core values. I usually like to have 3. So my core values are authenticity and integrity as one, because I just think they go together naturally. My second core value is curiosity, because I just think an open mind makes life a lot better and more interesting. And the third one is honest communication, or transparent honesty, one or the other. So those are just like my guiding compasses to how I live life, how I show up, and how I'm being. And then that sends ripples through, that carries over to my actions and what I'm doing. And so they're non-negotiable. So those are things that I live by, that they're unshakable. So people could hold a gun to my head and I would still live by them. So,
and for those who don't know Savannah personally, it's true. These values really do show up.
Oh, thank you.
And yeah, it's true. So
what are your 3 values?
I have, believe it or not, never made a succinct list of core values.
Huh?
Yeah.
Well,
so maybe for a future episode, I might be able to list them, but I'll name one, which is respect. And I know that that's kind of almost a cliche at one point, but if you think about what respect really means, to me, it would be to not to treat others the way you want to be treated. Because I want to be treated like an emperor. I want to be showered with gold and pampered and whatever.
You carry
But
around your mace.
yes, my scepter, my royal scepter, and but what I think respect really comes down to is treating others the way you would expect to be treated. And again, that goes down to when nobody is watching and when people are watching, and to just think about what is a baseline level of decency that people deserve, and not just people, but places, property, and just having that a level of decency, I guess, that pervades everything that you do and every interaction that you have is really important to me.
Yeah. And I think also this could go into a different podcast episode, but something that it made me think of as well is there are interactions that we have in our life where we're not going to be treated as we want, and people are maybe in our eyes they aren't being respectful, and they don't have the same values, and there are whatever way they might be connected to us. It's easy to be like, well, I have to accept this person and be in this person's life and have these interactions because X, Y, and Z. Family is a great example. I believe families have to be earned, and they're just not automated, and you can choose your family if you don't have that respect. And so there is that piece of authenticity as well, where that doesn't mean that you can be cruel and reflect someone's cruelty back on them, but you can have boundaries to say, in my experience as a respectable human, I would not interact with someone like this. Like, there just is a certain standard that you uphold, and there are respectful ways that you can create boundaries around what you are willing to tolerate in your relationships as well.
Exactly. Just as you wouldn't expect somebody to betray their own boundaries just because it made you more comfortable, you wouldn't expect yourself to do the same for them. So I agree, and I think it all just comes back to what you would expect of yourself and of others, and not to hold a double standard. Try not to hold the double standard for yourself. So people who have trouble setting boundaries and put other people's needs too far ahead of their own will have a high standard of how they would expect to treat somebody else, but then they treat themselves poorly. And then, of course, there's the other way around, the more kind of narcissistic types or whatever who have a high level of how they treat themselves and then treat others cruelly or dismissively or whatever. So I think that's just another great example to bring this full circle into integrity and authenticity of making sure that you're holding the same standard for treatment of yourself to other people. And whichever way you tend to go out of balance with that, look at where in your life that's happening and which direction you can pull it back into balance. If there's an area of your life where, like the advice Savannah gave, I would say look at where are you showing up as a version of yourself that you're really proud of and that feels really aligned. And once you've done your exercises of stripping away at all the external stuff and knowing who you are without validation, without people looking at you, without the identities that are based around doing stuff, and once you know who that is, it's like, where in my life am I already being this person? And maybe use that as your reference point.
Yep, that sounds great.
So with that, we thank you for listening. We're excited to be back.
So excited. We loved doing these.
Yes.
Well, I love doing these.
I did too. You can speak for me on that one. So as always, you can find me on Instagram at the North Star Body.
And I'm on Instagram at Primal Revolutions.
We gave you our Instagrams because that's where we want to hear from you. If you try any of these reflections out, we'd love to hear how they go for you, your successes, your struggles, and any revelations you might have had. And if there are any topics that are really brewing in your mind that you'd love us to explore in a future episode, reach out to us there as well and give us some suggestions. We love hearing from you. And lastly, if these are things that you feel like exploring, either from more of the emotional, psychological side with Savannah or from the physiological side with me, we are both coaches in our respective areas and would be honored to work with any of our listeners one-on-one. You can DM us on Instagram for any of those reasons. Until next time.
Until next time.